This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome to this much delayed episode of the Lekker Rugby Pod, Harry. I've had a bit of a podcast-free week, and I just said to you before we started talking, I didn't know what to do with myself, man. I'm so happy to see you.
How's it, Mbia? Good to see you too. The mothership with your perfect lighting. I'm working day and night on my lighting assembly. I'm one piece away. I think I need something on this side. But no, tonight's episode about happiness. And my favorite story about happiness is written by Nikos Kazantzakis, the author of Zorba the Greek, and one of my personal heroes. I'm not a guy who has many heroes, but he's one of them. Nikos Kazantzakis was ultimately the Minister of Education of Greece. But as a younger man, he was in law school, and then after law school, he decided to wander around in northern Greece where it meets Macedonia. And he tromped around, with sort of a rucksack. This is the 1930s or something. And he was at the end of his money. And he staggered into a town in northern Greece, Macedonia, mountainous, unfriendly, all the doors closed, nothing there for him, no hotels in that kind of town, and in the rain. And he was just hiding under an eave, and suddenly he saw a light of a corridor, and he followed the light and then went down the hallway. And at the end of the hallway, there was a widow dressed all in black. That's why he knew that she was a widow. And she was cooking a huge pot of lemon chicken soup. And the smell almost knocked him out, and didn't even use any words. And she motioned to him to sit down at her table, and she fed him a bowl and another bowl and another bowl, and then pointed without words to a cot, a little narrow bed, and there he slept. And when he woke up in the morning, she was sitting nearby, just sort of watching. And she told him it was the first time she'd seen anyone eat her food since her husband died, and that she was filled with inexorable happiness, almost soaring. And as he left that house, fed and warm and comforted, he realized that happiness is like a domestic bird, not an eagle flying high in the mountains, uncatchable, but right there in our midst. And that it's very important for the rest of his life. Kazantzakis knew that no matter if you're in war or peace, if you're governed by a bad government or a good government, if your country is overrun by tyrants or not, you have to be happy. And my reflection about the Rugby Championship and going back to back and sitting on the verge of another back to back to back, and seeing these players like Peter Steph Totoy, who was one of the greatest forwards to ever play the game of rugby, right there in our midst. Possibly one of the greatest captains, Sia Kulisi, one of the best hard forwards, Eben Etzebeth, one of the most gifted young fly-offs to ever stage a coup on the world rugby stage, Sasha Feinberg and Ngomazulu doing his thing, Ox, you just go on, and you realize these are people right there, accessible, maybe more accessible than in any major sport, and maybe more accessible even than before when the Boks weren't as good. That we must be happy. We must fight our natural South African tendency to be a bit gloomy and look for what's the next thing that's going to moor us coming down the road, and who's the next person who's going to cheat and steal from us and make us unhappy. We're happy, and we know it, and it is there, and we sometimes go right from a victory into some hand-wringing worry. But I would like the glow of victory to last a bit longer, and for us to have that soup at the table and realizing we're making someone very happy.
When you were talking about the Greek Minister of Education, I thought, where is this going? What am I facing here? And it ended up quite well, thank you. So I was heaving a sigh of relief.
On the end of year 2, we're going to play the Greek national team. No, sorry, I was...
We're famous for, you're famous for quoting all these, obscure people and things and the likes, but I think this one takes the cake. I like it. Thank you so much. So how do you measure happiness? It's quite an interesting thing. When you talk about happiness in terms of a rugby team and the way they performed, there are several ways. The way you felt when they sang the anthem and everything else, but you went another route, basically. You looked at a lot of statistics, specifically in the Rugby Championship, and you measured those teams against that, and you basically decided objectively, with a little bit of subjectivity thrown in there, who's going to be happy and who's not going to be happy. So tell us about those stats.
Numbers. A lot of numbers are by nature subjective because they have definitions inside them that are fabricated by humans. But as long as those definitions hold year on year on year on year, and as long as you're surveying the same field, as your variables are now cut down, it's like the happiest country in the world index, and many years it's Denmark, and which is not known as a frivolous nation where there's festivals or carnivals or or whatever, and they attribute the fact that Denmark is the happiest country in the world over 25, 30 years to their lower expectations. So when I'm talking about the Rugby Championship and what each team is happy or not, you have to factor in what they expected. Because
that's a good point.
Like if Argentina wins 2 games, but they're the right games, they're super happy. What if it was one against New Zealand, one against Springboks? For them, it's a great year. If New Zealand was to win 2, even if they were both against their greatest rival, the Boks, they would still be on a chopping block, and the whole country would be very upset to have won 2 out of 6. So kick us off in whatever country order you would like, but we can sort of examine who came out the happiest, why, and what they can work on.
I think you could have quoted Einstein here, because this is all relative. Relativity theory would have worked quite well here, but I mean, let's move on from that. I think the natural way to do it is start from the bottom. Look at Argentina, then move to Australia, and then look at the 2 top dogs, compare those 2. So let's start with Argentina.
Argentina took a long time to get into this competition and be a proper equal opponent. This is not a bash on Argentina. They face the most uphill set of characteristics. Yes, it's true that the Boks play all over the world, but there's still a domestic competition of note, and they still, for many of them, actually play in the ERC against each other. So even if they, like Marnus van der Merwe may not be in South Africa, but he's part of the same competition, right? And so there's measurements, and there's stat give and grab. A lot of the Argentines play for the French clubs, and the French clubs are notorious for not sharing information, because for them the club competition is more important than the country competition, until they want to win a World Cup, and then they fail because they've never seen the connection between those 2 things. You have to think Test rugby is important all the time, and do what Rassi's doing to build the synergy. Argentina then has this incredible uphill climb, almost like walking uphill into the Andes, barefoot into the snow. And it's almost a wonderment that they're able to do this once they were booted, like we were, from Super Rugby, because Super Rugby gave them more than it gave us. Like, I think we've profited actually from the departure. But Argentina, had a coherent team, the Jaguares, that then became the analog for the Pumas. So when I say that, I'm not being mean to our Argentine friends. I'm saying that if the trajectory of Argentina's improvement from 2015, 16, 17 had been steeper, then this idea that, this was a great rugby championship this year would have been quicker. And then it might have been saved, the actual format. As it was more like Italy in the Six Nations, except Argentina is 25% of the competition. Whereas Italy's that one Joel weekend that everyone likes to go. You're going to win. You rack up some stats. Everyone pads their stats. They score on Italy. And then only lately have they started to be good. But it took them 20 years, to get good. So Argentina actually was quicker than their Italian brothers and cousins. But Argentina this time around continued their lack of fear. So they're a fearless team. And on that, they'll be happy. They're happy because they had a go. They're happy because they beat New Zealand in Argentina, which gave their fans at home something jubilant that they can carry with them forever. They're happy because that as late as the Durban massacre, they were still in the title hunt picture. That's not as good, though, as 2024, where they were in the picture for real. I think more for real, like more of a possible destruction spoiler, plus maybe even a title hunter. This year, they were, pretty much locked back into where they had always been, which is wooden spoon or maybe almost. And the primary thing that will make them unhappy, although I think they're still predominantly happy, is they only scored 13 or 14 tries. Okay, in a 6-game tournament of this style, the way that Rugby Championship is being played now, that's never going to be enough. You cannot score just barely 2. you've got to get to 4 tries, 3 minimum, and 4 tries, maybe even more close to 5. And so the manufacture of tries, we all think of Argentina as tries, but they're just highlights. They don't occur enough. They don't come from first phase. They're not built enough in a coherent fashion where a player can say, I know how I will score most of my tries this season. They seem almost like accidents of nature. And so they're lovely. It's like Mount Vesuvius tries. Whoa, there was a volcano. But can you do that again and again? Their tries then at 13, I think they had a penalty try. So say 14 tries, 30 conceded. Obviously, that's a very dismal output, and that's not going to make Felipe Contepomi happy. And he will remind his players to stop celebrating a couple of wins and that kind of performance, because it's not going to get us anywhere. That's the unhappiness part. So the other unhappiness part of Argentina is they don't kick enough. We've been saying this for years. They don't kick enough. They're too in love with the run back. Yes, you scored a try or 2 off that, but 5 or 6 times you were caught behind enemy lines, snaffled, jackled, or you knocked on, and you were then toast in the scrum, which is the third unhappiness, is they still haven't found a way to survive in the scrums. They who were one of the most fearsome scrum nations in the world, they just cannot do it. And that's bad because they get penalized a lot. It's bad because they don't kick enough. So the scrums end up being in unfortunate positions. They're scrumming in the shadow of their own poles, which is not a great thing against the All Blacks and the Springboks, and increasingly not against the Wallabies, whose scrum is also uptick. So even though the refs sort of conspired, probably on commandment from the World Rugby, to penalize weaker scrums less and to make the bar even higher and to coach us to death about binds and understandings and breakfoots, it's still true that if your scrum gets massacred in a match, it's very difficult to overcome that. And it's almost the easiest way to lose because you get entries and exits at will. So Argentina, not as happy as they were from round 4. So round 5 and 6 made their happiness dissipate. And the Durban one will rankle the most. They stood up in London. They stood up because they ended the match on a high note. They can hold their heads high, and the integrity of the competition was clear. So New Zealand would not have looked across and said, you gave it to the Springboks. It's the Durban one where you had where Felipe would probably spend most of his energy either trying to maybe eradicate it, watch it, 10 times and then kill it, or use it. Coaches love to say that, but I would use that one. I would say, why are we doing this? The glimpses of happiness that the Argentina gave their fans were they scored a lot of points because they're not shy to kick goals. 162 points, which is more than the All Blacks and the Wallabies. I'm talking about actual points on the field, not tries. The other thing is they didn't tackle as much as the All Blacks and the Wallabies. They didn't try to live and die on Marcus Kremer tackling 20 times. They did try to play a different way. The other one is they were the second most dominant tackling team. They have got a brutal back 5 in the pack. Guido Petty plays like a blind side. You've got Marcos Kremer. You've got Juan Martin Gonzalez. You've got Pablo Matera. Oviedo. These are really big bodies who like contact and they like to eat meat. And 60 dominant tackles, I should define that. So in all the stat keeping, and I use Opta mostly, and they all feed from the same, original. This probably like one guy with some spectacles on, with a little handicap hat. Maybe it's you. And they
you,
are
Griffin, not me.
Literally, yeah. Maybe there's one guy doing all these stats, and then it feeds into all the other bases. But a dominant tackle is one in which I deny you gain line. I put you down. There's no tackle fight, so that you're just erased, and you fall back, right? So then I can snaffle you, run over you, I can counter ruck you, or it causes a knockout, a knock on, or it causes a lost ball. So all these, really big, like the tackles that make you go ooh ah. That's what I'm talking about.
Deny you gain line. What does that mean?
So in the mystical imaginary gain line of rugby, you release the ball from a ruck and you whip it from 9, let's say from 9 to 10. Then 10, let's say 10 is a tip pass to Damien Delende at 12. So then Damien's job is not to just run one step, two step, And that's not gain line yet. He hasn't even got to the gain line yet. He's got to get back to that imaginary line that existed from the 9 as he cleared. And so he's going to meet someone at that gain line. Usually a tackle will occur either just before the gain line or just on it. And his job is to get through that, either by it, around it, over it, or through it. If he does that, even if he gets hit on the line and then he falls over for another meter, that's gain line. He won the gain line. Every team wants to have 60%, 65% gain line success. Individual players like Delende would have probably close to 75 or 80% success. A guy like Archie Sneeman doesn't even look for gain line. He's offloading all the time. So there's different ways to approach the gain line. But in general, well, Jasper Wiese's job is to make it over the gain line. That's it. He never has comfort. He never has, the odds are always stacked against him. He often has to get the ball from a standing start, but he's going to judge his season against other 8s, other hard carriers, not against the fullback. Fullback has lots of room, but he's just going to look at tight forwards, and he's going to be better than Marcus Kremer, better than Adi Surveyor, better than Harry Wilson. He wants to be better than those guys, Rob Valentini. So when the counterpart of that is big tackles. We've talked a lot about how the Boks miss more tackles this season, but they're feeding you into the kill zone, by shooting. And then when you get hit with a dominant tackle by Ibn Etzebeth, who rolls over you, puts you the wrong way, so you're no longer able to present on your side, that dominant tackle is massive. Coaches will always tell you, defensive coaches, that the dominant tackle is the thing that can turn the tide of a match, not just for what happened in the play, but for what everyone feels, the chias around that. Sia Kulisi is a dominant tackler. Unnoticed in his stats is he's a dominant tackler. We talk a lot about guys like Malcolm Marks and what they do. He's a dominant tackler. So when he hits you, when he finds you and he squares up and can load and head up and he's driving through your hips, he will almost always win that collision. And so that ends up being noted down by the statistician as a dominant tackle. So the Argentina had 60 dominant tackles. Guess what team that was twice as much as New Zealand? So like when you're Felipe Contepomi, that makes you happy. That's the domestic bird right there in your midst, the warm soup. We are a dominant tackling team. We are a point scoring team. We take the 3. There's things you can glean from that. The unhappiness part is we got run over at Durban. We looked a little bit like we gave up. And we were probably luckiest because of the scrum de-emphasis. Because if the scrums had been adjudicated the way they had been for 15 years, they would have been carded in the game against the All Blacks and the game against the Boks at London.
I want to ask you this question. I thought it sort of slipped under the radar. The fact that the scrums were now so de-emphasized, like you said, the Boks did something funny in London. You were there. They scrummed with 7 men more than once. And used Peter Steph de Toy as a scrum off. Is that now the new approach? Maybe Russ is saying, listen, you don't want to make it important, then I'm going to use that extra guy because I don't need 8 guys. I'm going to just scrum you off the ball anyway.
Yeah, our friend Tank Lanning must come on again and talk about the load sharing. There has always been a theory that especially your open side flank is contributing very little to the actual push. I mean, anecdotally, you can see that the way they're hanging off. Sometimes they got an arm on the ground wide, their base is wide, because what they're really trying to do is kill the fly off. And they're just itching. Is the ball out? Is the ball out? Is the ball out? So, they're not really pushing. So if you can sustain your push from 7, and if you've got the upper hand on the other side enough, like we did against the Pumas, where we could have, I don't know how many scrums in a row were penalized, but there was so many that, they should have been carded. They were lucky not to be parted. Muchísimo suerte. Ustedes tienes for our Argentinian. So stop talking about Kane and Moody. You also lucky, okay? A lot of people are lucky in a rugby match. It's crime, pardoned. We got away with stuff. You got away with stuff. And getting away with that scrum without a card and a penalty try, you're just lucky Kobus Reinach scored, because if he hadn't scored, I think the referee would have gone to the pocket. So if you have that ascendancy, why waste another body that is not really contributing that much to the cause? Because you can use that body much better in the back line. In a card situation, like putting Damon Delende on the scrum, Maybe, maybe not. Maybe just leave him in the back line. And if the refs are not going to ping that much, or they're only going to ping for a real pushover, then, you adjust to the team you're playing. This year's Wallabies didn't give us much at scrum. So you had to be proper scrum. It was all in and, a lot of kilojoules. Everyone came off the pitch from those Wallabies games thinking, wow, Australia's scrum is fixed. So the unhappiest part is Argentina hasn't. They got a young prop who came on, but he got monstered in Durban. So before everyone anoints him for that one scrum penalty in London, he got monstered in the second half of Durban, which was probably even a worse scrum display than in London. So Argentina, on the base of all that, is not quite as happy as you might think. But in the annals of history, they're very happy about beating the All Blacks in Argentina. And it's a measure of how this championship never really became a proper tournament, because it's almost like everyone's rivalry with the All Blacks, individual rivalry with the All Blacks, is the real story for each team. Yeah. It's the Bledisloe for Australia. It's our obsession with becoming better than them again. We used to be, then they were, and now we're coming, now we're better. And then for Argentina, they just mark their history of rugby by scalps. Oh, we took this scalp the first time in Argentina, and then, so forth.
You've something about the URC now coming back is I'm looking forward to the Harry Index, reviving, because it's time. But I was thinking, as we were talking, to put things into perspective, you talk about objectivity and subjectivity, everything else. Should you have a Harry's Happiness Index, maybe? A mark out of 10, maybe. Where would you rate Argentina on the Harry Happiness Index?
Yeah, 6 out of 10 in the non-dog shit index. How not dog shit were you? I think Argentina had its moments, but 6 out of 10 seems about fair because they didn't progress enough from a year ago. And to some extent, it would be galling to them because the problems that were unfixed were the same problems they didn't fix before. So I think that's what a coach always hates. That being said, their 6 out of 10 is, graded with a curve because they're young. And there's something about a young team that's doing this well in a ferocious competition where everyone is just way too good, and you're circumnavigating the world over the South Pole like, Sir Francis Drake. It is brutal. So 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'll take that if I was Felipe Contamponi, second year in. It's a good one. Right, let's talk about, for me, almost, the surprise of the tournament, Australia, under Joe Schmidt. And I said to someone the other day, next year there's probably not going to be a Rugby Championship. It's the year before the World Cup. They bring a new coach, an inexperienced coach. Les Keats, 62 years old, never coached an international team before, had so success with the Queensland Reds. I mean, I wouldn't be too happy if I was Australia. I mean, if you take into consideration how much they've improved this year, what about next year? And let's talk about Australia now.
The Wallabies, yeah. And obviously, because I write on the Roar, Australia's top online rugby platform, sports forum, I do end up knowing quite a bit about the Australian context. And the Australian context tends to fixate on number 10. Every country has its position, its glory, celebrity position, and some countries it's a tight head prop. In some countries it's an open side flanker. But in Australia, it's always about this mystical search for the replacement to Stephen Larkham. And since Bernie Larkham, it's been a series of flawed candidates, whether it's Quade Cooper being too attack and then falling off every tackle, Bernard Foley being too boring Iceman, James O'Connor, not really being a classic 10 and having moments of glory, losing a match for you and winning a match. Same thing with Kurtley Beale. And so they just keep trying out different people. They kept trying more people this tournament. Some of that is injury force. Some of that is because Noah Lolesio was out. But it still seems like that's where they, struggle. In the World Cup, the terrible World Cup, 2023, Eddie Jones, a lot of bullshit's gone on about why they were so bad. Their set piece was fine. It was one of the top in the tournament. They have a really big pack. They won plenty of line-out ball. They had a decent scrum. At critical moments that failed, so people remember that against Wales. But the tournament was bad because they didn't get the ball to the third receiver. And Wallabies at third receiver and wings and bringing in their strike weapons like we saw at Ellis Park, they're brilliant. They just need to get it outside that sort of wood thresher zone. And so once again in this tournament, the moments they did that were great, but that was all the beginning. And then as the tournament went on, they hardly ever got the ball to their outside center, Joseph Akususu-Ali'i, who is, next level athletic. Tom Wright was injured. They had Max Jorgensen, who's a revelation at 19 years old. They couldn't get the ball to Max, Joey, and Tom. And then in the end, Tom was gone. And so that was their problem. Allied with this fact, which is the Wallabies were about third best in the tournament in every single facet, and they ended up third best on the table. So they kind of, rugby is sort of interesting how it gives you what you deserve. They're not deep, so when they have an injury, it matters more. They don't have a loaded bench like Springboks do, where they can just throw bodies in. The third best fly off is very good, and the third best fly off in Wallabies is not. And so I think the Wallabies sort of struggle to work their way into the tournament. They almost worked their way out of the tournament. The places and the stats that I looked at that I thought were really troubling was they didn't kick enough. They're like Argentina, 147 times. Contrast that with the Boks, 180 times. You need to kick more. If you want to have a guy like Su-Ali'i in your team, and have him get the ball. If you're not able to get the ball, the third pass to the third receiver, which is difficult against blitz defenses, then you have to kick it somehow. You have to do those kicks that Sasha was doing for Colby, that Mani was doing for everyone. Just those little chips, those little ups and unders, and Willemse, just scoot the ball, get it moving around, create fractured field. In some ways, you could look at Ellis Park as the template, and then they moved away from that. And we can talk about that when we get to the Boks. The other thing that occurs to me is they were penalized too much again. 63 times under Joe Schmidt, who's these iron, steely-eyed principal type. He wanted to eradicate that from the game. It's back, Joe. It's back all the way back in. And then the final thing is they don't offload. They're just like the All Blacks. They're skeptical. What is Super Rugby doing to people that they're not playing crazy? Is the departure of Argentina, Jaguares and Stormers types player, they haven't seen it. And I think Australia is now cursed by the limitation of sameness. So Super Rugby is too much the same. And so it worked for them when they played dead leg Boks at Ellis Park with the Boks actually hurt by the altitude and had only had warm-ups of Italy and Georgia, whereas the Wallabies had played the British and Irish Lions 3 times. That didn't work anymore. They couldn't go to different gears. And a lot of this tournament was played in weather, in wind and rain. And it just didn't seem like the Wallabies had a way of playing that depended on dry, hard fields like Ellis Park, where the ball was jumping around a lot. And then as the tournament, worked its way into proper rugby, they got munched by the All Blacks again and got squashed in Cape Town. Not quite as comfortable as we'd like, but still, it was a squashing type win, Andre Pollard type. And then against Argentina, in both cases, they lost the first half terribly and then had to come back. So the comeback kids, they did a good job, but the Wallabies, it's a hard way to make a living to tackle 900 times and hope that Fraser McWright gets a turnover. Hoping for a turnover from refs is it's a tough way to play the game. And I would say the Wallabies are no happier than Argentina. I would say, you asked me for the index, I'll give them both a 6 out of 10, and that's it.
That's actually quite interesting to me because for me on the surface, it looked like they were on a bit of a comeback. I remember you said after the game at Ellis Park, Laurie Fisher still said to you they were so happy that the Springboks changed the way of playing because then they didn't know how to counter that and they could counter. I'm surprised then that you say that they actually went away from something that did work for them. And I find that surprising. So if we had to say what could they fix in this, what's the way going forward? I mean, this was an upward trajectory. It just sort of plateaued a little bit. What can they do to fix it?
Anytime that you're minus 13 in points differential in a tournament, you're not happy, right? But you're moderately happy because of expectations, because Australia was so bad. And a year ago, they were just completely smashed by the Springboks in Australia with a kind of a B team in Brisbane and Perth, I believe.
Yeah.
This time around, that Ellis Park is a historic victory. So that's what boosts it over the 5 to 6. but it's got problems in it because you're minus 13 in a tournament. You did lose to Argentina, and you really got handled by the All Blacks. It was like, you were nowhere. And because the Bledisloe is the most important measuring stick that the Australian rugby public and institution has. The Bledisloe is everything. To be handled sort of comfortably, I wouldn't say laughed at, but a little bit kind of, where someone
divided, sneered at.
Like, good job, Wallabies, well done. You almost got that kind of off the field where the All Blacks were saying, hey, good fight, guys. You don't want that. It's like what England gives to Scotland. Yes. Yeah, it's that patronizing kind of thing, and I think that's the problem. Is they thought on that one they were further along. Yes, the Ellis Park thing was a welcome bonus. The Argentina loss was terrible, and then the fact that the All Blacks got to pat them on the head, like big brother to little brother, the Barrett brothers coming, hey, good guys, and a guy like James Slipper retiring 151 tests, having never won the Bledisloe. That kind of thing, it's an awakening. How do they fix it? Very ironically, the Australians might have been the ones pushing the most to depower the scrum's influence in penalties. When we say depower it, we just mean that which got you a penalty before will now not get you a penalty, right? They might have been, under Mike Cron, the former All Black scrum, they might have preferred the old ways. I think they would have beaten Argentina quite handily. So be careful what you wish for is also a necessary codicil on happiness. Just be careful. So I think maybe they might like they got a big brutal pack. They were the best scrum we faced in the Rugby Championship, and excellent loosies, a lot of fire. They're hard to beat. Of all the teams, they were the one that didn't get massacred by anyone. Their losses were just losses. They weren't just destroyed by anyone. So the fix is maybe more of the same, but better. It's not revolutionary. Got a really good coach. He game plans for one individual game very well. Doesn't know how to beat the All Blacks with these Wallabies. It just doesn't. They don't match up well. It's like whatever the Wallabies do, the All Blacks already do that, but better. And so they cannot even do a contrast like the Box. They can sort of do something very strange to us. It's almost like they play each other every week, all year.
Yeah.
So nothing is surprising.
I wanted to just, in closing, before we talk about the All Blacks, contrast the response of Argentina after the Durban demolition to the Australia response in the second Bledisloe. I mean, they were just nowhere. That sort of fizzled out. That dog in them, that fight in them, that wasn't there. That's quite surprising for an Australian team, isn't it?
Yeah, but I do think some of that is that Kiwis grow up thinking like they just know how to beat Australia. There's just matchups that exist in rugby. And so once they had them, they had them. When Argentina was done, it was different because there was so much of that in Durban that was like things we'd never seen before. The whole game was bizarre, right? So you could almost chuck it out. The problem with the Wallabies losing to the All Blacks is it seemed like exactly how it would happen. And they didn't know a way to get around it. And so they just went back into the same thing, doing the same thing, and got done the same way, except more comfortably. So yeah, I just think that that's a larger issue, is they play each other in Super Rugby. Both teams are primarily drawn, All Blacks totally drawn from Super Rugby. And so they just know everyone's tendencies. I mean, if it's like every single thing is the same. And the Wallabies are trapped in this playoff 9, but fixate on 10. They play off 9. They have a Connor Murray type 9 system, and Joe's trying to find his executor at 10 that does the loop, that does midfield rucks, and that can kick the ball really well. And, we've got Tane Edmed, who's 4 caps in. You've got Carter Gordon, just been bought back from the league for 100,000 transfer fee, Aussie dollars, and then put on 500,000 pay, going to be probably put with the Reds. And you have, Nowheresville, Noel Lolesio injury. You got James O'Connor, in Leicester Tigers now on his last legs. He was good at times, and then he was actually very terrible at times in this Rugby Championship. I thought he was terrible against Argentina, and he was woeful in Cape Town off the tee. So you have, I don't know. I think I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I'm criticizing Australia for fixating on the 10, but I kind of see where they're going is they need a pivot. And that pivot would allow killers like Len Ikitau, Su'ali'i, Max Jorgensen, who's really in the running for, breakout player of the year, whatever they call that thing, rising star. They've got weapons. They just don't get the ball to the weapons enough. Now, they scored 21 tries. They leaked 17, but they're too much on the tackle, be brave, and come back at the end. And tackle, be brave, and come back at the end. Who does it remind you of? It reminds me of the Springboks under Heineke Meyer from 2013, 14, 15, where you do well, but then you always find that you're up against the All Blacks in the end and they nip you because they can also tackle, go well, There's got to be something where Australia can write the story of the match. They are the author. This is my book, They're too much trapped in I can counterattack you. Oh, okay, box, you're up. Now we'll come back. Well, that works until it doesn't work. And then usually it doesn't work in quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. It just doesn't. And the Rugby Championship, because of everyone being even late in the tournament, it turned into a quarterfinal, semifinal, and final, which is, Bok rugby. And it's what it is not the Wallaby style right now, which is be brave and hang on and try to nip it at the end.
All right, let's talk about the big dogs. And we talked about relativity in the beginning. Beating Argentina wouldn't count for much happiness. Let's talk about the All Blacks. Rugby is a religion in New Zealand, and it's not where it used to be. It's now being threatened by basketball, apparently, strangely enough. So what would the New Zealanders feel like?
Yeah, we call it the Steven Adams effect. Steven Adams is a power forward in the NBA. I think he's been over 10 years now. His annual salary is like his deals that he makes over $100 million US. So if you're a young man and you're looking at who would I like to be, I want to be Steven Adams. I don't want to be Simon Parker. So he's much more pop, culture figure. And New Zealand does pump out tall players, good hands players. They like the sport of round ball. They like, even if you watch All Blacks videos of what they're doing behind the scenes, they're playing hoops, they love it. So they have a competition, and it's more deadly to them because they're 3 or 4 million people. It's not like you could have a lot of different codes, in England and South Africa, and you could still, populate those codes. All Blacks, obviously had a tough opening here because they lost to Argentina, and then they lost in the worst possible fashion in the history of rugby. So now you're looking back 140, 150 years to the Springboks in Wellington. And that there are losses and then there are losses. They're 7-2 like we are, right? So like they're poised right now, 7-2. They do an easier end of year tour. They end up, maybe ahead. They actually got back to number 1 ranking for 3 weeks. So since 2019, they've been number 1 for about 5 weeks. It's been Box most of the time. Then there was an Irish sort of a 2-year period in the middle there. And then it's been France for 1 week. Okay, so that is not how the All Blacks see rugby. They don't see themselves in a 6-year period as being number 1 for 3 weeks. But that's the reality. Given that reality, that overarching wider view, which every proper serious Kiwi actually understands, and they know what I'm saying right now is true, and the other people on the fringes who are, erstwhile fans, bandwagon fans, or just trolls, shut the fuck up. Like, that's not where New Zealand belongs. New Zealand belongs being right there, number 1 or number 2, and every week there's a battle for number 1. It's not okay to be 3 or 4 weeks in 6 years, number 1. That's the larger context into which Razor Robertson came. Like, this is not a problem of his making. He steps in a year ago, and he's supposed to change it. Every new coach gets a year where no one judges them. So 2024 was a different year. 2025 is a tougher grading criteria because expectations would have risen. And they got to play their 2 games against the Boks in New Zealand. That's always the conditions under which they must win the Rugby Championship. They always win the Rugby Championship when their 2 games against the Boks. The hardest opponent usually is in home. And then they get to play 1-1 against Australia. And then they should always win against Argentina. Under no circumstances does any Kiwi coach that's fully loaded, got a good team, should they ever lose to Argentina ever. It's like losing to Scotland. Who's better right now, Scotland or Argentina? Oh, they're about the same. Has New Zealand ever lost to Scotland? No. So they should never lose to Argentina, but they did. So here's where the season unravels is Razor Robertson in his second season is going to be graded much harder than his first season. The wider context already gives him pause, and then he puts these figures down, and they're very important because these 3 stats that I've been able to glean are the only time in the history of the 12-year history of the Rugby Championship. I say 12 because we were not playing one of those. So it's 13 total, but only 12 times was it all 4. They're the lowest offloader, 33 offloads, compared to 48 for the Boks. They have the fewest line breaks, where you actually break the defensive setup. There's a line, it's sort of a loose line in defense, and you get beyond that by beating someone or evading them. 25 in 6 games. Guess what we had? 48. Okay, so offloads 33, line breaks 25, meters per carry. This is a simple thing. You just put a ball in guy's hands and he runs. How much does he get? There's a lot of easy meters for the fullbacks. There's hard meters for a guy like Malcolm Marks or Cody Taylor. 2.9, less than 3. 3 is bare minimum. Most test teams try to get closer to 4, which is what the Boks were, 4.1. So I looked across and I said, when was there ever a season where the All Blacks were the worst out of the 4 teams? The wooden spoon stat for meters per carry, line breaks, and offloads. Classic attack stats. Classic All Black excellent stats. They're always the offloaders, Sonny Bill Williams, chicken wing. They're always really good at developing breaks, searing breaks through the middle. You see Bowden Barrett gliding through and scoring untouched. And then meters per carry, Artie Savea, guys you cannot put down. They were the worst on all 3 of those stats. That's the worrying situation for Razor Robertson, because he did have Wallace Titi. He did have Artie Savea. He does have Quinn Tupaia punching holes. He's got Geordie Barrett at 12. He's got, Caleb Clark and people that are hard to put down. Will Jordan, you think Will Jordan by himself would give you line breaks and meters per carry and offloads. So those 3 things stood out as being worst in comp. And yet, this is why our brothers, our cousins, the Kiwis, the All Blacks, New Zealanders are, we love them so much, hate them, is at the end, they're tied at the top of the table on points. And, things go a different way against Argentina, and suddenly we're in trouble. So they are a tough team. They're always there at the end. If you had to put all your money right now on whether they'll be in the final in the 2027 World Cup, you would still bet on the All Blacks in sort of a home World Cup. So I don't know. It's hard to grade them, except if you factor in the expectations of the shaky islands of New Zealand. Is they don't think that's good enough. Razor Robertson's not. You cannot say things like he has to do this or he's fired. That's not really how the All Blacks work. NZRU doesn't fire their coaches. Never have. They never will. It's a quiet tap on the shoulder, a walk to the conference room, and then someone like Grant Fox talks to you and says, listen, I'm going to help you out picking some players for a while. And then, you get denuded and emasculated, piece by piece until you decide to walk into the sunset and go coach in Japan. So, Razor Robertson needs to show what is the style, what is Razor Ball, what is it? It's not developing line breaks. You apparently don't like your players doing offloads. You are very conservative. You're a constrictive, old, staid, dyed-in-the-wool blazer boy. Why? I thought you were the breakdancing guy that was going to be young and cool and hip, and he's not. He is. He preaches error-free, and error-free is fine if you want to soak up tackles, 932 tackles, and win in Eden Park, and win every time you're at Eden Park. But not enough matches are at Eden Park. So this is the problem. They have an excellent opportunity to fix that coming up, though, on the tour. They probably are looking very good for 11 wins and 2 losses for the season, which obviously is good in anyone's book. But this particular championship, they couldn't lose to Argentina. They just could not. And then that final passage in Wellington is they will want to erase that from their memories, and they never will be able to. It's just stuck there. And every player who was a part of that, just like the players who were part of the NIL 57, it's till their dying day. Even when they write the autobiography, it'll be there, it's there. And so that goes 2 ways. We know very well that it could inspire this exact All Black team to lift the William Webb Ellis Trophy Cup in Sydney, and even mention Wellington and say, "Ooh, our darkest days were at the Cake Tin." So it can go that way, or it could be a sign that Razor Robertson doesn't have the assistant coaches in line yet, doesn't have the big scheme, and maybe is missing something in how you punch holes in these stacked defenses at Test rugby level. So, I know you're going to ask me for a grade, and I'm going to go ahead and ask me because I'm going to think for about 5 seconds.
All right. So before I ask you what the score is, I want to ask you one question about those stats. And how much of those stats were affected by that blowout in Wellington that skewed it a little bit, where they actually gave up, or wasn't that too much of a factor?
Yeah, so meters per carry were not affected at all. There's so many carries and so much tendency. It didn't deviate. That game wasn't an outlier there. On the lack of line breaks, it's interesting because I think maybe in that game it was close. I know that the Boks didn't develop that many line breaks. They actually scored different ways. And the final thing is on offloads, not at all. So they were an offload to be 33 compared to 48, on a percentage basis is massive. That's a style of play. I would say the one that throws it off the most there, the Wellington is the tackle count. New Zealand made 932 tackles versus 664 for the Boks. So that's a pretty big delta. And much of that could have been, boosted, but they still would have been the third most or the second most. It was what the Wallabies and the All Blacks played a style of rugby that forced them into making a lot of tackles. They seem to be wedded to this idea of running the ball in the midfield without proper kicking. And it just ended up with them, playing a lot of rugby in areas that are very tricky to play in. And it's safe to run phases against. So the Boks had safety against both of those teams in building phases, even in Cape Town, even though it wasn't a phase ball, that you could hold the ball and it didn't feel like it was a big problem. James O'Connor wasn't making his kicks anyway. The scrum was, the Boks' favorite. So I think All Blacks need to revamp how they score. They score too slowly. They require too many rucks. Hugh Griffin has some great stats around this about how laborious the All Black style is under Razor. And my theory there is that he won at Crusaders by having the best players. And if you win by having the best players, like you driving a Lamborghini and you beat me and I'm driving a little Fiat, it's not that, that wasn't that great for you. Now suddenly you go into a race where everyone has Lamborghini, you're in trouble. So did Razor learn to do more with less, or did he always have, more, and he just won by having more All Blacks than everyone else? I don't know. But I would say I give them a 5 out of 10. Whoops, that's lower than Wallabies and the Pumas, even though they're higher than them on the table. And that's just purely about expectations. Mm-hmm. I think having those 2 games against the Boks in New Zealand, you just, we won both of ours a year ago. They should have won those 2. And if they do, then it's done, finished, klar. It's great. It's like wrap it up in a bow. Not only would it have been satisfying for them to win the championship, it would have been satisfying to do it by beating the Boks. And then take that Argentina game and just say that's a no-brainer. So am I saying they should always win every match? No, I'm not saying that. But they should always win the Bledisloe, because they do. And they should always win at home against the Boks, because they almost always do that. And then you add in that the loss, the score would have been 7 out of 10 if the Wellington loss had not been the worst in history.
That was my next question. You're supposed to win both games, and then you go one of those games, the worst loss in your history. I mean, that just drags it down. I would have given them a 4, to be honest.
Okay. That's fair. I wouldn't mind that. I just think, in the end they did battle back. And so I think you look at proper teams and they get better through a tournament. And you look at other teams, and no matter how much you think they are good, in the end, Wallabies peaked in the first round, and Argentina peaked in round 3 or something. So I think that's the problem. Is the All Blacks still have that kind of championship mettle when it comes down to it. They can make you nervous.
But talk about the Springboks now. This is one we've been waiting for. And something that you just mentioned that made me think when you said teams get better during the tournament. And one thing about South Africa is the players got better during the tournament. I'm specifically, for example, referring to Malcolm Marx here, who played an ungodly amount of minutes for the Springboks. You'll talk about that just now. But if you talked about him, his line-out throws were not that good, and he was not himself and then in the last game, he just came alive, despite all those minutes that he's played. That to me seems is a sign of a great player and a great team.
Yeah, I love Michael Marks because he is a guy who takes responsibility. So in the season, I think it was actually before the Rugby Championship, he waved away other people being the problem or system. It's easy for a hooker to say there's a lot of parts to a line out. There's the call, there's the movement, there's the middle, then there's the lift, and they kind of deflect. Malcolm never does that. He's had yips before in his career on the line-out throws, and they returned this year, and then he dispelled them. I think that's brilliant. I almost think that makes it a better season for him. The second part of that is guys like Marks were loaded up on minutes, 557 minutes so far. That puts him, the top 4 minutes of the whole squad out of 47 guys who have played so far for the Boks. You got one of your best players with that, that minute count. So, say what you may, it wears on you, when you have to throw, when your shin is hanging on by a thread and looks like it's been shredded by a plow or something, you are thinking about that when you throw. So that's the wear and tear factor. Colby's decision-making, 502 minutes, just, people that are just loaded up with minutes will tend to start to make their mistakes and have ups and downs. It's just a law of averages. If you have that many minutes, Kanan Moody, 500 minutes. So he has a lot of minutes to make mistakes too. And he's going to be on an island, spotlight. Can you handle it? I think that's brilliant that some of the youngest guys like Moody had 500 minutes and some of the oldest guys like Peter Steph Toy had 560 minutes. So you are sending a message, again, of squad. Team is king. There's no favorites. There's no cushy rides. But also, if you're a young guy, we're going to throw you in the deep end, and we're going to see if you can swim. Because don't forget, those were semifinal finals for Ethan Hooker and Kanan Moody. Kanan Moody had a really wonderful win and loss record, but had he had any, nutsack type games where you're just gripped, and fair play, the young man made his mistakes. Like people have famously said, that he was lucky to be on, but he kept going. And his ball and all tackle near the end when Argentina had a patch where they could have got back into the game, to me was one of the plays of the match. He shot correctly. He met his blitz and he signed his name. So I think the story of minutes is part of this. It's very much a part of this Boks season because, planning for a 15-test year and with 5 to come and therefore 400 more minutes to be allocated is a really important reason why you might like a guy like Andre Pollard having only 250 minutes right now, or Argees Neyman 250. You can put some minutes into those guys and still bring in young guys like Marnus and Buan and not worry that it's going to be too inexperienced. We're not going to have that Bloemfontein match against Wales where there's 14 youngsters. And then say, hey, Andre Pollard, bring us home. You need to have a framework around it. So pretty much in every game, there was a framework of experience into which you could put an Ethan, you could put a Buan, and you could rely on the fact that when Sasha looked to his left and he sees Kurbas, the old sheepdog, and to his right he sees Damon Dialende, the bouncer from Greenpoint, he's safe. He can do his crazy stuff, because he can, if he really needs to bail out, he can. I think this was a very interesting way to win a championship. It is not like the other teams. in almost every regard, when you look at the Springboks and the rest of the Rugby Championship, we stand out. We look different, and we can go through, why and how.
Yeah, I want to talk about that stats. You made such an interesting post on X. I actually WhatsApped you afterwards. That's saying something. And you mentioned, for example, and the one thing that jumped out at me, and we'll talk about the other one. The one thing that jumped out at me is the least penalties conceded this past decade by the Springboks. And a lot of other things that are the best in this decade, or the best of the Springboks ever, or the best in the history of the tournament and the likes. And we were wondering at the beginning of the season, does Rassie really worry about winning the Rugby Championship? And quite clearly, he does worry. He did worry about it. It might even have been the last one. Maybe that's why. But the point is, those things, those improvements didn't just happen willy-nilly. That was part of the planning. That was all hard work paying dividends, wasn't it?
No, absolutely. I think on the question of winning or not winning, like, we'll do some counterfactuals. If we had won at Eden Park and also had that Cape Town massacre, but we didn't win the Rugby Championship, I think we'd be also pretty happy. So, I'm putting that into perspective. Yeah. So we would never like to lose 2 at home to Australia. So that would also, upset us. But I think the idea of taking 2 scalps in New Zealand and further making it 8-3 this decade, Boks versus All Blacks, would be tasty for Rassie. All of us growing up in the sour poison of losing to the All Blacks over and over and over. This is what's fun, right? This is the domestic happiness bird that we're talking about. Is right there. We're enjoying this. Enjoy it. But yes, once it became a thing, and then you start thinking of back to back, I think Rassie attached to that like a limpet, like a barnacle on a ship, and so let's win it. And so the jubilation in the coach's box in Cape Town was mixed, like all motives. You go buy a car tomorrow, you're gonna have 7 motives, right? Safety, does it look cool? Do I feel sexy? I like the color? Is the money right? Does my wife like it? Whatever. So same thing when they were jubilant and mosh pitting. Part of it was, how tasty is it to come into Wellington and just beat them up in their backyard in front of their kids? Part of it is vindication of, oh man, I got so much shit. Was catching so much Tony ball, and is Jerry Flannery up to it? I proved that. Do you think that you can question me? That. Another part is just, I'm so happy for that particular guy. I love that player. That's my guy. Archie Snyman running away after being sort of spanked and disciplined. The bad boy, come good. That's cool too. But part of it is also, this thing is working. It's like you looking at Hugh and my name, on the table at Twickenham, the pride of building a thing that was hard, that people naysayed you on and bit your ankles, and they had the comfortability of being on the sidelines on the couch telling you, don't do this, don't do that, this is not working. And then it works. So there's all these emotions that are tied into this. And yes, it's a championship. So it's hard for me to stack them all, because there's more powerful impulses than winning sort of an awkwardly named, strange rugby championship that maybe had its lost vintage, But it is cool as a trivia question always, to win 3 of the 12 that were fought and had the last 2 to be on your name. I just don't know sometimes the inner workings. Having been around more this year than ever before, and I think that captain's run in London was the most illustrative for me. I get to see the most, body language. It is a happy camp. This is a happy team. Happiness pervades the camp. You can see it from the run on. You can see it from people who like to be quiet and alone, and you can see it from people who like to be happy chappy. There's all that mix. There's every kind of personality, style, and background you could possibly dream of in a team. There's no team on earth of any sport that could have this much diversity in a team of outlook, background, origin, even the coaching staff coming from everywhere now. It's just very, very cool to see. So, MV, my answer to your question is basically, I think they enjoyed it. I think they enjoyed this ride. And then, as we know, famously, Felix and Rassie enjoyed it a little bit too much the day after.
I'm happy that you raised the Felix and Rassie thing, because something that you picked up at that captain's run is the role that Felix Jones actually plays. And we were wondering, where does he fit in? Because he's now not the defense coach, he's not the attack coach, he's not the skills coach. But you made a very interesting discovery there, because made a connection there, if I can use that term. Rassie sort of removes himself a little bit. He's sort of almost aloof. And how does that work now? Just take us through the setup of the coaching staff at the moment, because it's quite a big coaching staff, let's be honest. How does it work?
Yeah, it is. Although I think ratio-wise, player to coach, when you actually see it operate, on a morning, on a field, in the rain, in London, it sort of feels about balanced, because you have a lot of setup guys. You have people that have individual skill group tests, a Don Human that's very focused on his portfolio and secure, because no one even comes close to matching up to Don Human in the whole world on how well he's done on his craft. You need a conductor. When I was a child, my mother taught piano, and we would have people come to the house and hour for hour, and they would ding 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 ding, and then my mother would say wrong, this, that, change, whatever. And I would sneak out the window and go play, come back, because it drove me mad, actually. If you want to torture me right now, just put me in Guantanamo Bay and just have, a piano lesson for hours. But what I remember hearing was the tick, tick, and it was the metronome. And the metronome was the device that swings like a pendulum. And, you hear it a lot when you say 100 Pollard is metronomic. So you can set that at any calibration you want. Felix is the metronome. He is the calibration of once all that pre-stuff, strapping, and some guys come out early. Sasha's an early guy. Andre's an early guy. Kickers tend to be, because they want to get the extra reps in. Your funny guys, your Achia that is incapable of being serious. And your guys that are sort of in their own world, like Nordke. The Ruan is sort of a look at the sky guy, and almost like an innocent abroad. You need a guy, and that's Felix, that makes no apologies for being the fucking metronome, Like, when I walk on the field, then we go. There's no chat, there's no hugs, there's no hazard, there's nothing. A whisper to Jerry, and then boom, we go. And even people around him change their aspect, their affect, they're on. It's eyes to eyes. Not so much yes, sir, but pretty close. He's not that much older than the players. But he's just got that vibe, which is, you see, he plays hard, works hard, plays hard. But he's intense. And I think that's been given over to him by Rassie, so that Rassie can do another thing, which is that Rassie can stay exactly at the altitude he needs to be in an organization to catch energy levels, to get the overall shape, to feel the happiness of the group writ large, and then adjust it, including adjust Felix if he has to. But he has to stay at that level, because if he's down in the weeds and pulling weeds out of turf, that's terrible. Now you get into the problem that Joe Schmidt faces sometimes, or Eddie Jones, where you're too much. The head coach shouldn't be in every meeting. The head coach mustn't be, tick, tick, tick metronome. He's got to say, are we even picking the right songs? Or maybe he's the guy that hugs the student, like my mom would have done sometimes, and go, you're getting there when maybe they're not. And then, to pick your virtuoso. So you're going to be the ones that play, at Newlands, at the, at UCT, at the concert. You're my three people, So Rassie has to see that whole group of 37 people and just find where he sees extraordinary, Like, even on a practice field, you look at Sasha and you go, I mean, you are like something sculpted out of a mythological Greek tragedy about what a rugby player should look like, And I mean, maybe if you're all about skill, and time, and metronome, you miss the magic, of music's supposed to make you cry. It's the one thing that's universal. It's a sad song. It's sad in any language. You don't even know what they're talking about. So, I think Rassie is able to look at the symphony of rugby now and catch it, because he has exact trust that Felix will be the bad guy when he needs a bad guy, and the timekeeper who needs a timekeeper. He's the doctor who knows how all the different, medicines fit together so you're not doped up. And that way, Don can be focused on scrum. Dion can be talking about the line out. Jerry can be talking about when we shoot. And we have, the kicking coach. So I think there's all these different vibes around there. And the other thing that I brought, the guy I love to watch is Jaco Piper. Jaco is just a guy running around having a very, very happy time. Talk about happiness. That is a man who would struggle to be unhappy. I don't know why. I need to talk to that guy and see how I can be so happy because, I'm not that happy.
He's also one of those people that you were quite surprised by when you met him in real life. You have this picture of someone in your head, and then when you see him in real life, it's completely different, wasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose because a referee always has an outsized shape in a game. Maybe they look bigger, but Jaco is, there's him and Mornay van der Berg were like eye to eye.
small guys. Yeah. That's about something you almost forgot. We never gave the Springboks the happiness score. So they're not dog shit score. What is it?
Listen, let me tell you a few reasons why the score is going to be good, but not perfect. Let's look across a couple of things. Number one, the most tries ever scored in history, 27 of the championship. The least tackles made of the comp by leaps and bounds. Low penalty count, like you said, 56, so less than 10 is a very important number because then you're not pinned in your own territory too much. Line breaks are plenty. And then I looked maybe from, year to year to year and saw those changes. And I just felt like there's good stuff brewing. So I'm going to give the Boks an 8. They would have got a 7, except for one thing. No, two things. The historic victory in Cape Town and then making two teams give up, sort of one big bundle. The other one is going back-to-back in and of itself is difficult because you get too happy. And this is where happiness hurts you. If you're so happy, then it's so hard to go into the grind of misery that you need to go through the veil of tears, the gauntlet. What was that thing we always do when we were late to practice? Then our coaches would just say, form the gauntlet. And then every single player would, just have their legs astride. And you crawled through that entire line. And everyone was allowed to hit you as hard as they wanted on your bum as you scurried through. That's what's required almost. And so I think that's Ellis Park. I think Ellis Park was the gauntlet where we got smacked on the bum, punched in the lower back, because someone always did that in practice as well. And it just was a wake-up call. But there's one thing that's wrong about that. People say that's when we changed. Didn't change anything. We realized that we were 5 minutes away from putting Australia away. And then our attention wandered. We started looking, at the clouds. We started looking at one spectator. Yeah, she was pretty. She was fine. She was cool looking. But maybe, don't look at it right now. And that little distraction, more so than lack of motivation. I don't think that's true. I think, they're motivated, but it's just hard to focus. You got a book deal over here. You got a commercial deal waiting over here. You got an offer to think about from Montpellier. Is it good? Is it bad? Schools for the kids. There's just so many things. What I'm going to eat tonight. So I think that allowed focus to reign, and a guy like Felix could put that metronome at a much higher volume. And it was from that point on, Jerry was fighting for his 8-year contract, and Tony was coming out of his sort of shy shell and maybe being more clear. Like, guys, I mean kick more, not less, but I mean kick to these quadrants, to these spaces. We've got superiorities in height all over the pitch. Why are we not using it? And we also have superiorities on speed on the fringe. So, why are we not spraying the ball to the... I think there was just a higher degree. When I saw the team at Captain's Run in Teddington or wherever we were on the outskirts of London, it was a very happy but focused team. And I think that's the combination you like. And also think there's room to grow. We haven't seen the best yet. And with Italy, Japan, Wales, and then the big ones, France and Ireland, I'll be there in Paris and Dublin. There's an incredible opportunity to find what 9 out of 10 looks like in happiness.
Oh, yeah. You just got approved for Ireland, by the way, so I'm excited to hear that. I'm looking forward to that one. I want to just ask you one last question, and we're talking about Felix Jones now once again. Felix left the Springboks after the World Cup in 2023, went to England, didn't cover himself in glory in terms of the relationship with Steve Borthwick, and then came back to the Springboks, and now have been elevated to this almost very influential position almost. And Rassie is famous for his planning, and he's looking forward to everything. Do you think this was always part of the planning, and that missing cog was Felix Jones? Because he sort of looked like they made space for him. Sorry to harp on about this a little bit, but where does it fit in? Was it luck? And did Rassie really need this? And losing Felix was a problem, and then coming back was sort of a godsend. What happened there? What do you think?
I don't know, but I think I was wrong about Rassie on some things. I think being around him and doing what I do really well, which is watch people, and even if I seem like I'm a crazy person, half drunk all the time, I get a pretty good sense. I think Rassie is an adapter. He's a guy. I don't know if he literally believes in evolution or thinks or puts it inside his mindset, but practically he does. And there's three things I don't think he thinks. Okay, so I'll say, because it's almost like how I can define someone. I don't think Rassie thinks that the world is a well-ordered garden with manicured trees and the flowers growing in the proper season, number one. Number two, I don't think Rassie thinks he's the good guy in every story and that he's the hero. I don't think I think he knows that sometimes he misses the mark, and that he knows that was him. He doesn't say things like, that wasn't me. No, that was him being that guy. He's been a dous at times in his life, which he freely recognizes and admits. So when he's dealing with a guy like Felix, who I think is a difficult character too, this is going to be a convoluted way of answering your question. I think he can understand someone coming home as a prodigal, waiting at the not expecting
perfect
failure,
analogy, yeah,
but okay with it. Like, you still get the fatted calf and the festival and the party, and if an older brother is being jealous, shut up, let's kill the pig and eat. Rassie can pivot from something bad to something good quicker than most. And the third thing I don't think that Rassie thinks is that everything will go to plan. I think he absolutely thinks it won't, that everything will get fucked up, upside down, in a hurry, a lot. What's that called? FUBAR, fucked up beyond all recognition. So there's no doubt that when he said dog shit, he meant it, and that he was appalled, and that he, like us, was very sad about that. But he got back on the horse quicker, didn't he, than some people, And he would have looked... Maybe that's when the utility of Felix mattered the most, because you had a guy defending his post. Jerry, they didn't do what I was supposed to do. Coaches, you cannot curse your own players. In the end, you're just going to be an unhappy chappy. Tony saying, well, I think they got the wrong idea. I don't mean bridge passes to Suali. I mean kicks around him or some air in it, to variety. Maybe it was Felix that had to sort of say to his fellow Munsterman and his Kiwi friend, I think we can blend this. We can double down, which Rassie loves, If you want Rassie to do something, to stop doing something, don't tell him to stop doing it. It's the worst possible thing you could do, because he's just going to go, oh yeah, let me show you. I'll use Andre as a forward over and over until it works. So I think those things are where I think Rassie knows he needs a sidekick. He knows he needs a right-hand man. He knows he needs a man behind the throne that doesn't have aspirations to the throne, who is the Prince Machiavelli, who, can cut a throat at night on the pillow. You got to have someone like that in your team where no one really fucks with Felix.
And by extension with Rassie. Yeah.
But that allows Rassie to be a happier guy and stay where he needs to be, which is almost like he's the drone where he can look around at the whole field.
A big picture guy.
Yeah.
I think of Marlon Brando sitting there as a godfather, and Consigliere brings people in and he grants them favors. That's what I'm seeing in my head now. Just one last thing about Felix. I think a big part of their success is the fact that Felix was with the Springboks for so long before that World Cup. He was away for a short time. And Rassie needed that sort of connection, having lost Jacques as well. I think we sometimes underestimate the loss of those two big guys, big figures at the same time, and what effect it had on Rassie specifically. Anyway, that was a long one. Thank you so much. It was an awesome one. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you, Eddie.
Cheers.
This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.